Good afternoon. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good afternoon. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day, and welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by American Jewish Committee. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's digital platform that enables you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. Over the weekend, Hamas launched a brutal war against Israel, killing hundreds of Israelis, injuring thousands, and holding over 100 hostage in Gaza. Joining us today to share urgent updates on the situation in Israel are Ted Deutch, AJC CEO, Eyal Hulata, former Israeli National Security Advisor and former head of Israel's National Security Council, and Lieutenant Colonel Reserve Avital Leibovich, AJC Jerusalem Director. Moderating our conversation is AJC Chief Field Operations Officer Melanie Marin-Pell. After we hear from our guests, time permitting, we will take your questions. You may email your question to questions@ajc.org, questions is plural, or you can use the Q&A feature in Zoom. Melanie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you to our audience, and special thanks to Avital, to Eyal, and to Ted for joining us here today. On Saturday, many of us awoke to the first reports of an ongoing attack in the south of Israel. It quickly became clear that this was something different than what we've seen before, sadly seen before. We began to hear reports of infiltrations into southern Israeli kibbutzim and communities, of hundreds and then thousands of rockets fired at Israel. And then the reports became more graphic, more unthinkable, as stories of whole families massacred, of 260 or more young people slaughtered at a music festival, of abductions, of rape, of shocking brutality. The stories are horrifying. And now we're hearing the stories of anguished families desperate to find their missing loved ones. Thousands of Israelis have been called up to duty to protect the Israel we love. The pain is profound and the trauma is incalculable. So as we engage in this important conversation today, and as we try to cover some of the many questions we have, we want to begin by acknowledging that this is raw, it is dynamic, it is complex, and it is deeply personal. For us at AJC, what makes part of it really personal is our team in Israel, led by Avital Leibovich. So Avital, we'd like to begin with you. What can you tell us about where you are? And Shai is with you. Excellent. Where you are and what is happening now on the ground.
Yes, so first I'd like to apologize to the viewers that I'm speaking inside a car and the quality of the picture is not amazing. And the reason is that I'm in a base and I can't really bring any cellular device inside, so I prefer to do it in a safe environment. I am 2 miles from the Lebanese border, and maybe I'll start with that. Today, we actually found ourselves here in a few areas along the border in which infiltrations took place by different squads of different sizes, mostly by Palestinians who are part of Palestinian terror organizations, which are also in Lebanon. They're very active in Lebanon. There's Hamas, Palestinian organization in Lebanon. There's Islamic Jihad in Lebanon. And they tried to infiltrate the Israeli border. Some areas they succeeded. There was exchange of fire with them. We have some unfortunate outcomes in our side. Earlier today, and this happened, I think 3 hours ago, but earlier today, we also had an attack of mortar shells on some of the areas in the border here as well. The regulations for the people here of the northern part of Israel, which is the Galilee, primarily in the region, if someone wants to look in the map, are basically they're required to stay near shelters and be very cautious. Of course, school is canceled. A lot of public transportation has been minimized. And in addition to that, people who are elderly and with special needs have been evacuated earlier today. Some people choose to leave their communities. Those communities and cities which are right on the Lebanese border took an independent choice. And of course, I can definitely understand that, and decided to move more southern towards Haifa area and even south of that, just to feel more safe. In the south, where this war started, unfortunately, more and more names and faces. Right now, by the way, there is a red color alert, which means a rocket attack on the area of Ashkelon. The rocket fire is still ongoing from day one. The estimation is that around 5,000 have been fired. Some of them are long distance. When I say long distance, and the distance between Gaza and Tel Aviv is approximately 100 kilometers. But today there was firing rockets beyond that to Hadera area, which is approximately 150 kilometers. In addition, the firing was also beyond Jerusalem. So that was also quite tough. We had one heavy barrage in the afternoon, like 2 hours ago. Heavy barrage to a few areas, including an area which AJC colleagues live. It's a community called Haradar. Luckily, no one was injured from AJC Jerusalem, but sadly, there were a few Israelis who were wounded. One of them was wounded severely, exactly in this community, in this area. So you can understand, Melanie, that Hamas still has the capability to fire rockets in this quantity already 3 days into this war. They still have that capability. The morale is still quite tense in the country. More names of commanders, soldiers, civilians who were killed were revealed today. And I know the numbers are overwhelming. So with your permission, I'd like to share 2 small stories just to give the people watching a sense of this overwhelming experience, a very negative one that we're all undergoing. I want to tell 2 stories. The first one is of a woman called Yafa Adar. Yafa was one of the founders of a kibbutz on the border of Gaza, Kibbutz Be'eri. She was 85 years old, and she was abducted from her house and taken to Gaza. Her granddaughter today wept in front of the cameras, explaining to whoever wanted to hear that her grandmother would not survive this situation. Now, I saw the footage of her grandma, of Yafa, sitting in a car. In the back seat, in her 2 sides, there were Hamas terrorists, and in the front, there were 2 terrorists. She was sitting in the middle of these 2 terrorists in the back. And it's a tragic sight. It's really a tragic sight. What can you say to this level of brutality that they are taking an 85-year-old woman? By the way, you can see she's an 85-year-old woman. There's no question about it. The level of brutality is something that we have never seen before. And the second story I want to share, I don't even know to compare it in the scale of horrificness. This is a young woman by the name of Avital Leibovich. And she is also from Kibbutz Be'eri. And on Saturday, when those hundreds of terrorists who crossed into Israel, few dozens went into her kibbutz, she took 2 children, which were not her children. These were the neighbors' children, Negev and Eshel. And Eshel is 4 months old, and Negev is 4 years old. They went into a closet, which was quite deep. And her neighbor actually was blocking them. So he was more in the front part of the closet, and they were more in the back. Those terrorists, those vicious, brutal, barbaric terrorists went from one room to another, smashed whatever they could smash, and they looked for them in the closet. They killed the neighbor who actually saved their lives because he was blocking with his body. He really saved them. And then they dragged her out, and imagine the sight. She's holding a 4-month-old baby who she's not his mother. His mother, by the way, is missing. That's a different story. She's holding him in her arms. The 4-year-old boy got a bullet in his heel, on his foot, because one of the bullets hit him. So he can't walk properly. And they're dragging her, walking to Gaza. Now it's a few hundred meters, but when you're wounded and bullets are whistling around you and under pressure, by the way, before they did that, you know what they did, Melanie? They put skirts on her to make sure that she appears modest. You see, these vicious animals with zero human rights respect put a skirt on her like a curtain so she would be modest. She had to walk with a baby. The 4-year-old was taken by one of the terrorists on his shoulders, and they walked as a group towards Gaza. And when they entered Gaza, and she saw already the first house in Gaza, she understood from one of her captives that he did some gesture with his hand, and she understood that she could go quietly. He gave her the 4-year-old child, Negev, and she took the baby, the 4-month-old baby, Eshel, on her arms and began walking back to Israel, the same distance of 700 meters. On the way, she saw another group of terrorists. She hid in some kind of, the area was not straight, was not even. So she saw this ditch. She hid in the ditch with the baby and the child, which cannot walk. By the way, how did she carry the 4-year-old who could not walk? She turned the skirt into some kind of like a baby carrier. You know how this baby Bjorn kind of, so she turned it to something like she really turned into some kind of a rope which she could carry him. So on one side she carried the baby, on the other side she carried the 4-year-old. So she hid. They lay down in this area which was like a ditch, like a pit, until they passed. Luckily, the baby didn't cry. They went out. They ran into Israel. Now the trauma is huge because these children, which are not her children but the neighbor's children, the mother is missing. And the father was murdered when he was protecting them in the closet. So, the level of horror that we are exposed to day in and day out is something that we have never thought in our lives that we would see. And the numbers will continue to grow. I'm happy to say, though, since I'm surrounded by fellow reservists, that the motivation to go to the reserve is extremely high. And I know that sometimes you're seeing publications of people saying, we need socks, we need toothpaste, whatever. I can assure you that there is more than 100% show up of reservists. And when I say reservists, it's people like me. My husband, as of today, is also in a base, in an Air Force base somewhere in Israel. And my son is in a base. And so this is the same thing. People with families left their families behind. We don't know, I don't know when I'll see my kids the next time. Maybe it will be another week, maybe 2 weeks, whatever it takes. And instead of, being in their comfortable homes, in their own shelters, they're here everywhere in the country. So that's a unifying and very optimistic factor. I'll stop here.
Avital, thank you so much. Those stories they're so incredibly painful to hear, and yet it's so important that we hear them. It's so important that we remember that each person has a story. Behind each number is a story, is a family, is a loved one. It's truly tragic. Before I turn to Eyal, I want to ask you, just this is a little bit of a pivot to some of the political questions we're hearing. And many in the United States are asking this question, many around the world, about the potential for any sort of unity government. We're hearing reports of discussions. Do you have any insights you can share about where those efforts stand to form some kind of unity government?
So, you know, I would not race so fast to the possibility of a unity government at this point of time. Look, we are in a real emergency. This is not just another round in Gaza. This is not a story. We have nearly 1,000 people who are dead. We have 3,000 wounded. We have hundreds who are missing. So politics really is the last thing that we prioritize at this point of time. And yes, there was a meeting between Netanyahu's representative with a lawyer and Gantz's representative, but so what? I mean, the country is unified. The opposition is behind the coalition, which is important and very good for the people of Israel to see that. I'm not sure we'll see these prospects coming to fruition in the next couple of days, because I'm not sure what will be in the next 2 hours or 3 hours. I can tell you that when we retaliated 2 hours ago against the infiltration attempts on the border here, and I'm sharing with you this because Hezbollah published it, there were Hezbollah people who were killed, although the infiltrators were Palestinian terrorists. Of course, they're operating together with Hezbollah at some points. So it's unclear what Hezbollah will do next. It's unclear whether Hezbollah will surrender to the Iranian pressure or not. It's unclear how far is Hezbollah willing to risk Lebanon, which is a failed state already anyway. Not that Hezbollah's priority is the people of Lebanon in any way. So we are living in uncertainty. Of course, we have intelligence, and of course, we have assessments. It's not that, you know, we are, but we are living in uncertainty. Now, I'm in the army, so I'm exposed to more information than an average Israeli. But think of an Israeli who woke up this morning and received the names, new names of people who were killed that they were authorized to publish. They were authorized because they found their families and they, you know, notified the families that names will never be published before finding the families. And then I saw friends I have from the army who lost their sons, or an officer who served with me who lost her sister. So this is what we are waking up every day. We are now in a situation, I don't know anyone who doesn't know someone who is either missing or dead, because we are a small country and we all serve in the military, or at least a big part of the country serves in military and reserve. And this is the news we hear day and night. So politics, at least for the averages, of course, everybody would love to see, you know, the disputes put aside and the government come together. But I don't think it's around the corner, I have to be honest.
Well, thank you. And of course, we too prioritize the security of Israel above all else, for sure. Hopefully you can stay on with us, Avital, as long as you're able. I'm sure there'll be questions at the end.
Unless there's a rocket attack, and then if you'll see me running,
well, we hope you can stay. Eyal, so that is a really excellent segue to you. So you've served in the security establishment for many years. You served as Israel's national security advisor, as was mentioned. So from the vantage point of the roles you've had, what else can you share with us, and what do you think our audience should understand about the security situation?
Thank you, Melanie, and thank you, Ted, for inviting me. Avital, it's groundbreaking to hear the stories you gave, and I want to wish you and all the people around you that you'll be able to continue the good work that you are doing. Keep safe, always in a running distance from shelter. Look, I think what is important to understand is that we are indeed in an unprecedented situation. Right? I mean, I've been talking to journalists and people throughout the day, trying to explain that, and I know how difficult it is. So I want to use the time to you and through you to make sure that we understand how difficult this is and how unprecedented this is. I can talk later about how this happened and why were we surprised. I'm sure everybody has questions on this. Fine, I won't be shy of answering. We've lost 1,000 lives in a day. This hasn't happened in the Independence Day, Independence War of Israel in 1948. We lost a total of 6,000, a little more than 6,000 people back then. It's true that we were only 600,000 Israelis at the time, but this has never happened. Never happened. Now we've suffered terrors of rounds of terror, especially from Hamas, over the last 30 years. And it so happens that every time that Israel is in a process that could create a new reality in the Middle East, these are the kind of things that happen. During the Oslo years, and people in the audience may remember, Ted surely does, as the process continues, it was Hamas who started bombing buses in the middle of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, causing massive casualties in a very brutal way. This is way worse. As Avital says, and our stories are just examples of the things that we've seen. They indeed moved from house to house, from room to room, from bed to bed, shot people, dragged them. The incidents close to the Re'im camp, where they had this party, this night party, they massacred hundreds of people, unarmed. And they clearly knew what they were doing, because I'm sure they heard the music in Gaza before they came there. So this is a targeted assault on civilians in ways we haven't seen. Hamas just issued a warning that if Israel continues to bomb houses in Gaza, they will start executing the hostages. ISIS does that. No one does that. No normal people do that. This is completely inhumane. This is rampage in ways we haven't seen before. And I'm not saying this, to just for the plasticity of things. The stories are important, and I'm very happy that Avital could share those. We need to understand that Israel woke up on Saturday to a new reality as it comes to our neighbors. And this is especially important because Israel, for almost a decade, from Tzuk Eitan and also through Shomer Chomot, our strategy as it went to Gaza was to refrain from going back in, to refrain from reconquering Gaza that we left independently during the disengagement led by Sharon, which was head of Likud at the time, by the way, back in 2005. And he suffered a lot of criticism for this, but he did so because Israel understood that it is better to disengage from the Palestinian population and allow them to try to govern them by themselves. Well, soon after, Hamas took over, and soon after started to produce rockets and fire at us, and we're in a sequence of escalation since then. Israel had a strategy to try to keep Gaza calm, to keep Gaza in a relatively humanitarian situation. For years, Israel has supplied money and diesel for electricity into Gaza to try to keep it in some way. The government that I served as national security advisor allowed workers to start coming from Gaza to Israel to work, to have a level of economic base that would provide to the 2 million Palestinians that live there, that, by the way, do not support Hamas anymore because they know that they're ruining their lives. And throughout this time, that was Israel's strategy. There was always criticism by people that were not hard enough on Hamas. But the main goal was to try to keep it as confined as possible so Israel could deal with more emerging issues like the Iranian nuclear program, like the attempts of Iran to grow their reach in our northern border, to deal with Hezbollah better, which, as Avital said before, we're on the brink of them joining in. I hope this doesn't happen. I think this would be a strategic mistake for Nasrallah. I think if he wanted to do it, he would join them on Saturday and have another surprise from the north, and that would be even more devastating. If he joins now, it will be hard on Lebanon as it will be hard on Gaza, but of course it will be hard on us, and I hope this doesn't happen, but we'll see. It could happen. So this is kind of the scenario that we're at. And the reason I'm explaining this is because now Israel is in a situation where, I want to call it a dilemma, but I think actually there is no dilemma. Israel cannot allow Hamas to continue to rule Gaza or to continue to exist as a terror organization in Gaza after what happened 2 days ago. I can only imagine how the cabinet meetings evolve. I'm not a part of them anymore. I can imagine what would be the suggestion that the military provide. I know what are the plans that were made. I know what the consideration were. But this is what's going to happen because Hamas made a strategic decision to break all of the rules and all of the norms and everything that they did before and escalate that to a level of complete inhumane issues. I'm not for a second saying that the rockets that were hit on Sderot and on Ofakim and on Ashkelon over those years were justified. Of course they were not. They were also targeting civilians, but it is very different to move face to face with guns and shoot those civilians, those kids, those grandparents from such close proximity. This is the situation we're at. And the reason I'm explaining this, and the reason I've spent all the day explaining it also here, is because what's going to happen is going to be very severe, because the implications of what I said, the means to remove Hamas from Gaza, is going to be very, very deadly. This is, many casualties on our side and a lot of collateral damage on the other side. Israel has got a lot of strategic support from the United States over the last 48 hours. And Israel is grateful for that. I wanted to say that this isn't, we don't take this for granted, but I think this is the beauty and the nature of the relationship between Israel and the US. Israel has always stood by our side in times of sorrow. So in a sense, it is taken for granted, but I try to say this in a very, very good way. What President Biden said, what Secretary Clinton said, Secretary Blinken said, what Secretary of Defense Austin said, the movement of the carrier in the Mediterranean to project force. We don't expect you to fight for us. We don't need the planes to drop bombs over Gaza, but the projection of force in this region is very, very meaningful. And we will need this support as we go on this goal. This will take time. It will be very, very bloody. And I think that we're getting the understanding from the international community, Europeans as well. They understand Hamas broke all of the rules. We cannot have another ISIS in the Middle East. One was enough. We cannot have another 9/11 in the Middle East. One was enough. And what happened 2 days ago in Israel is in that magnitude on those ballparks. And we don't have any other choice than to act accordingly.
Thank you so much, Eyal, for that perspective. One more question for you before we turn to Ted. And you mentioned Iran. Obviously, you've spent much of your time and career focused on Iran. What do we know about Iran's involvement, and how should our audience understand Iran's role?
So I've been following Israeli media and interviews done by officials and ministers on this. Look, I don't have the intel, but what I do have is a broad understanding that is for years. Iran has been supporting Hamas for years. This isn't new. Iran has been funding the military branch of Hamas for many years. The numbers I saw today in the Israeli press was that about more than 90% of the budget of the military branch of Hamas was funded by Iran. We know this for years. The Americans know this. The Europeans know this. They were the vehicle to move the funds. And they did this in parallel to issues that Israel supported to provide money on the civilian aspects of Gaza, because we wanted to maintain a level of stability. So Iranian influence in Hamas isn't by any way new. The question of whether or not they knew on this specific target or not, I think is important, but not as important. Clearly, this attack works for the strategy of Iran. Israel was in a process of normalizing with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. This is a devastating strategic loss for Iran. Khamenei, the leader of Iran, said it in his own voice. Raisi spoke about this days ago, saying that I think it was Khamenei saying that any country that colludes with Israel is on the wrong side of history, and use terms as terrible as we usually hear from the Iranians. Clearly, they had a reason to do this and to derail this. Now, the fact that only Hamas responded and not Hezbollah is for a different story. I guess there are reasons for that, but this can change, as we said before. Iran would always let others die on their behalf, always. That's the proxy strategy. This is how they conducted their issues, not only in this area. This is what they do in Iraq. This is what they do with the Houthis in Yemen, on Saudi Arabia. This is what they have done in Bahrain. And the ability of them now to do this in Israel is very, very alarming, especially because of the magnitude of what just happened. So, at this point, Israel has no interest of going into a multi-front confrontation. I truly hope that where Avital is standing will remain as calm as it is right now, and she doesn't have to run to shelter, because we don't need another front at this point. If we'll have to, we'll fight it, but we don't need it. We need to focus on Gaza. We need to once and for all change the situation there, and then, indeed, we have another open page to be settled with the Iranians.
Thank you so much. Ted, happy to turn to you now. And you've been speaking to leaders from across the United States, from across all sectors, from around the world. We're hearing a lot of support, as Eyal mentioned, right now from world leaders. Can you just share a little perspective on what we are hearing and the way the support is manifesting?
Sure, and thanks, Melanie, and thanks for everyone who's joining. Before I do that, though, I want to thank Eyal. We're really fortunate, Eyal, to have the benefit of your insight on our Advocacy Anywhere program today. Thanks for joining. And Avital, I know that I'm speaking for everyone who's watching. It is for those of us in the United States and across the Jewish world who care so deeply about what's happening in Israel, the opportunity to hear firsthand from you what you're experiencing, the powerful retelling of your experiences and experiences of others in Israel, reporting to us as you are from just outside of your base, it makes the personal connection that we feel to Israel even stronger, and certainly the connection that all of us at AJC feel to you. So we send you our strength. We are praying for your safety and all of those that you're with, and all of the IDF and all of the people of Israel. Melanie, the good news is that the response to this horrific attack, and let's be clear about what this is, and Avital spoke about it, Eyal spoke about it, but this is the point I've been making in my conversations with government leaders, with business leaders. This is not something that's ever been experienced before in Israel. More than that, this is not something that is easy for anyone to wrap their heads around. Just the incredible scope of this barbarism and brutality, the horrific attack that has now led to 1,000 deaths, which people keep talking about 9/11. This is the equivalent in American terms of 10 9/11s for the tiny country of Israel. That, as Avital points out, everyone there has already felt this emotionally with knowing someone who's lost somebody already a couple days in. And the Jewish world is so small that I know I speak for so many on this call. We're all checking in with friends and loved ones, and maybe are one step removed from where Israelis are, but still feel so connected and having experienced, sometimes directly or indirectly, the loss that's felt. And it's a moment, as I've also told the leaders that I talk to, it's a moment to make clear that there is a moral choice to make here. And fortunately, the United States and so many leaders from around the world are standing with us and the side of morality and decency in standing with Israel, because you're either standing with Israel or you're standing with these vicious terrorists who have committed these heinous acts, whose goal is to massacre Jews. I've said, and not everyone knows, it's certainly in the broader world. On this call, I think most of us are familiar with pogroms. Pogroms are an attempt to massacre an individual group. Historically, it's the Jews. That's what this is from Hamas. And you're either with Israel or you're with this terror group. And there was no one. I was asked earlier today, Melanie, about some of the responses that we've seen in some parts of America. There was a damnable letter from some student groups at Harvard. There was a rally in New Haven at Yale, standing in support, I guess, in support of the terrorists. And as we've made clear, at this moment, the reason it's so important to stand with Israel is because if you live in America or any other civilized country in the world like Israel, and terrorists came in and kidnapped your loved ones and killed your friends and dragged your cousins across the border to hold them as hostages, you would demand that the government take action. And as we anticipate what's coming, this is the last thing I've been saying to all of the officials I've been talking to, as grateful as we are for the support, and Eyal talked about this, President Biden's statements have been so strong. Secretary of Defense, the movement of the aircraft carrier group to show the strength of the United States and the support for Israel and to send a message to Iran very specifically. The statement from the president of the European Commission and the 27 states that she represents across Europe standing squarely with Israel. The way that capitals across the world have lit up their Capitol buildings in blue and white in support of Israel. We take none of that for granted. But as I've told them, as Israel responds the way any country would in support of its people and to stop the massacre, it will become clear to the world that the infrastructure that Hamas has been building with all of the money coming from Qatar and coming from other places across the world, money that should have been used to help their people, they've been investing that into weapons facilities. And they've constructed those weapons facilities and their ammunition storage facilities and their terror barracks and their headquarters next to and below mosques, in tunnels below schools and hospitals. And when Israel does what it needs to do, there will be casualties, and there will likely, sadly, be many casualties. But the point that I've tried to make, that we try to make to all of these leaders we talk to, is to remember the difference in the approach. And really, nothing sums up this moment more than the fact, and Eyal can speak to this, and Avital can speak to this, that every one of the civilians who may be killed as a result of Hamas using them as human shields, every one of those losses will be regretted by the IDF. Great precautions are taken to prevent the loss of even one innocent life in carrying out this mission, whereas every life, all of the stories that we've heard, the painful, horrific stories of loss we've heard, every life that Hamas terrorists have taken has been met by joy and celebration and dancing. That is the difference. And so we're going to continue to make that case. We're continuing to talk to leaders from around the US, from around the world, in Congress and beyond, because we can't let up. Those of us who love Israel and understand how important this moment is, need to do all we can to ensure that the support continues, not just for the first 2 days and the first week, but for weeks and months and however long it takes to win this war and to stop these massacres and these evil, vile monsters.
Thank you so much, Ted. And to that point, we know how important language is. And you have, as you said, been using the term pogrom in your media appearances, which is incredibly powerful. We also know that there are some who almost want to soft pedal what is happening, or we'll hear the Hamas terrorists referred to as militants. We hear tacit justifications for what is happening because, well, you know, if Israel hadn't done X, Y, or Z, then this wouldn't have happened. It's sort of keeping on the theme of what you were just saying, but how do we respond to this, and how can we guide our supporters, our friends, those listening today? What is your advice to them when they hear language of this sort?
Think about how we felt as a country after 9/11, and think about how we would have felt if we had seen, the Democratic Socialists of America gather in Times Square, as apparently they're doing or did, I don't know, to support Al-Qaeda. There's no one in the United States, there's no one around the world that supported Al-Qaeda after 9/11, because everyone understood what that was. There was no one who said that Al-Qaeda were a bunch of militants. Every single story, every day, and every day since has been about the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11. When ISIS attacked France, nobody said that those were just ISIS militants launching some sort of attack. Those stories then and every day since have been about the terrorists that struck France. That's what this is. So there's no equivocating here. There's no soft pedaling this. There's no but this or but that. This is a moment that calls for moral clarity, and it's not new. We've done this before, and the world has done this before, and the world has come together before. I can't explain why people would choose to stand on the side of terrorists, but that's not where most of the world is. And those of us who are on the side of decency and morality need to condemn it, and condemn it aggressively, hard, every single day. There is nothing to be defensive about here. This is very much about standing together, actually in defense of morality, the Jewish people and the state of Israel.
Thank you, Ted. Last question before we turn to our audience. We know we have many questions coming in through our chat. Please continue to send them. We'll get to as many as we can, and we'll try to consolidate as always. Ted, someone mentioned, you mentioned what's happening on college campuses, and you referenced the statement by a number of student groups at Harvard, full-throated support for essentially for Hamas, for what has happened, for the brutality against Israel. Can you speak to what AJC is doing to support students on campus, and then more broadly, what AJC is doing and how others can help?
Sure. First of all, there's no acceptable pro-Hamas position. This is not on the college campus or anywhere, but this is not about academic freedom. This is not about free exchange of ideas. Hamas is committing atrocities, war crimes against Israeli civilians, has slaughtered Israeli civilians, is holding dozens of hostages and not even allowing the Red Cross to visit them. So in the case of Harvard, our message to the university, to the president and the administrators, is clear. These aren't competing ideas. You need to condemn these views. You need to stand on the side of morality that your institution stands for. The last I checked, if I remember correctly, I think veritas was a fairly important term at Harvard University. Well, if you stand for truth, if your university is founded on truth, then you have an obligation to set forth the truth that Hamas is a terrorist organization, and students or faculty members or community members or anyone else who sides with them is siding with a terrorist group that you condemn, outright condemn. That's the same approach that we're taking elsewhere. We encourage AJC activists to make their voices clear. I'll, if I may, actually try to calm down for a moment. Sorry, Melanie, for just a moment. In addition to reacting to specific things as they come up, AJC continues to reach out to our friends in elected office at every level of government across our 25 regional offices. We continue to reach out through our offices around the world to leaders from around the world, to the thousands of world leaders that we've taken to Israel on our Project Interchange. We're continuing to engage with them. My own mayor from Boca Raton, Scott Singer, went on a Project Interchange trip recently, was with, unfortunately, one of the mayors from southern Israel who was killed by Hamas, and posted a very strong statement, the kind of statement we've seen from so many people that we've worked with. And we continue to reach out to our friends in different faith communities. I saw in the chat someone from the Hindu community. We're grateful for the support from all different religious groups. We're reaching out and are grateful for the support that we've seen from Latino groups and from leaders in the Black community and from leaders in the Asian American community. But again, it's not just this moment. We need to continue to do this work for the foreseeable future as Israel does what it needs to protect its people. And then in the meantime, we've also launched our own fundraising campaign to be able to get money to Israel through the groups who are doing this. But we know that there are people who we want to use our reach to make sure that there is no one who wants to support Israel who doesn't have the opportunity to do so.
Thank you so much. We will also be participating in vigils and rallies and gatherings around the country and around the world. So join us if you can at any of those in your communities. They're really happening everywhere. It's very heartening.
Can I say, Melanie, sorry
Please.
to jump back in, but I just want to comment on that last point. We had a call with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel just yesterday, and one of the things that's really clear after that call is that the rallies that we do around the country, and I urge everyone to go out and participate in one in your community with us and federations and all of the other groups who are planning these rallies. I really encourage that. But what I was reminded is, as important as it is for us to come together as a community in these rallies, and we'll be doing the same thing, pulling together virtually leaders from the Jewish community from all around the world. It's even more important, and Avital, this is the message I want you to hear. It's the message that we got from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Avital's sitting just outside an army base. Every opportunity that we in the diaspora have to show Avital and all of the reservists and all the people of Israel who are living in fear and unable to leave their homes, to show that we are with them. In many ways, our gatherings here are even more important for our family in Israel than they are for us.
Thank you. With that, Claire, I will turn it back to you to ask some of the questions that have come in from our audience.
Thank you, Melanie. Avital, my first one, for several are for you, so I'm going to try to combine them. The first one is from Russell Shorts in LA. What's a sustainable endgame for Israel? It seems like there are only bad choices: retake control of all of Gaza with the obvious problems, or simply reinforce the border and destroy as much Hamas infrastructure as possible. And can you also explain, does the siege to Gaza that was announced earlier include a complete block, including the Egyptian border with Gaza? What's the thought on handling humanitarian aid to Palestinians?
So thank you for the question. Obviously, I cannot go into operational plans, but I will say this: the immediate goal for Israel is to restore safety and defend the borders of the country and return as much stability as possible. This is the first and main priority. By the way, as we are speaking now, just in the middle of my first part of the briefing, there were rockets fired from Lebanon again, here to the border. And in addition to this, in one of the kibbutzes in the south, the medical services announced that they evacuated 106 bodies just from one kibbutz, 106 bodies. So we are in a situation in which there are places, there are communities in Israel which lost 10%, 20%, 30% of their residents. This is unbelievable. So the first and main goal is to return the safety and to defend the people. And this has to be an active defense. By the way, you can't hear this because the windows are closed, but jets are flying over me, and the entire night the jets are flying here. So this is the first and foremost. Of course, there are additional challenges and aims, such as to create a different reality in the Gaza Strip, to increase Israel's deterrence, which is something obviously that you measure with time. But obviously I cannot go into further details on this. Now on the second question, and this is important I think for everyone, because I assume that in the coming days or hours, we will begin to see a lot of propaganda from Hamas, speaking about innocent victims in Gaza, speaking about the fact that Israel closed the borders, speaking about the fact that Israel stopped electricity. And this is exactly where Israel would need the support. Because it's one thing to see horrific pictures of dead civilians, which everyone with a right mind and a good set of moral values understands and identifies with, but it's another. It's very easy to fall into that trap of fake news or distorted narratives that Hamas will, without a doubt, insert into every place they can, whether it's social media with bots and maybe Iranian bots, which we're seeing already here in Israel. So that will be the real challenge of the support in Israel. I have no doubt, by the way, I agree with Eyal that the US will continue to support us, but it will be a challenge in the UN Security Council, which is meeting on Monday, and it will be a challenge in different parliaments. And I assume it will be happening, those horrific pictures from Gaza. And yes, Israel is in a war, which means you act as in a war. And the war, there are no pretty pictures from a war. And Hamas has its own electricity plant, by the way, which they don't actually invest time and money in maintaining. And that's why Israel supplies Gaza with electricity. Imagine the irony that we are supplying electricity to factories which are producing drones and rockets which are fired at us. It's absurd. So yes, Israel cut the electricity because we need to defend ourselves. This is the first thing. And that's why we need everyone to continue and speak up for Israel, just like Ted mentioned before. And that will be the challenge in a few hours, in a day or two, when the pictures from Gaza will come out. And the stories will be, I can tell you all the stories from now. Oh, the hospitals are collapsing. We don't have enough electricity. We don't have enough medicine. That will be the stories that will come out of Gaza. And please keep in mind that we have to defend this country for the sake of the 10 million people that are living here and for the next generation of the Jewish people.
Thank you, Avital. Eyal, my next few questions are for you. I'm going to combine a few. First, to what extent does Hamas's terrorist attack have support among the Palestinians? And also, do you have any insight or information on the hostages that can be shared? We've heard rumors of negotiations with Hamas, threats to execute, rumors of prisoner swaps. What do we need to know?
So first about the support, unfortunately, there is support, of course, for the attack in other Palestinians. But you know, I mean, if Ted explains support for Hamas encompasses here in the United States, and how can we be surprised that there is support for Hamas in the West Bank? However, support, we don't see in the West Bank a rally of terror and violence. In this regard, West Bank continues to be relatively calm at this point. Again, I hope this stays this way. This clearly isn't in the interest of the Palestinian Authority or the population in the West Bank to join this role of fighting. If we talk about support, we also need to look at how this is viewed in the Arab world around us. I think also in the Arab world there is an understanding of the magnitude of what we're seeing. The initial statements given by some of our new friends or old friends were very similar to the kind of responses that they gave on previous rounds. I didn't like it then, but I could understand if it was any similar. But as I think they grew in understanding of the magnitude of the horror that was executed by Hamas, they also changed their language. If you would view how the UAE response, the second response was, I think they used the word we're a peril of the Hamas violence and specifically as it comes to snatching the people from their homes and taking them back to Gaza and the hostages. Now, as for the hostages, look, what we know is that there are many. What we know is that they have already killed several of them because there have been horrific footage in social media. So, there is no doubt that they wouldn't let the Red Cross see them because I'm sure that the situation is very bad. I don't know what they're thinking as it comes to those hostages. I mean, it is very humiliating. It is for us, of course, and it is causing a lot of pain and suffering. But I don't know what they think about this. Their spokesman just said, as I think I alluded before, that if Israel continues bombing, they'll start to execute the hostages. If they think this will change our course of action, they don't understand the magnitude of what they did. They killed 1,000 people. We have no doubt that they would have killed the other 100 that they took back into Gaza, or 150, or whatever the number will be. As for, you said there were rumors about negotiation. Israel is not negotiating the swap of hostages. Israel is not in this position. What Israel has said, and I think more people in the world have said, and I expect this to be a corner on the discussion in the Security Council, is that Hamas needs to release those hostages, period. They shouldn't have taken them in the first place. And that's it. Since I have no illusions that Hamas will do this, then we will need to conduct this war while those terrorists hold our hostages, and then we'll see what happens. If there was a way to go in there and take them back, I hope this would have been done. I know some of my friends in the military, I know that if they had a chance, they would go do it. But this is probably very difficult to do with this consequences. This just makes the situation a lot more difficult, emotionally, of course, and morally, of course, but this will not change the course of what Israel has to do.
Our last question, before I turn it back to you, Melanie, is for you, Ted. Many on Zoom and over email are asking us, how can the Jewish community help keep the narrative focused on what's happening in Israel rather than the misinformation?
Well, I appreciate the question. It is what we've been dedicated to in these first few days. I do encourage people to go to our website, our American Jewish Committee, and our Instagram and Twitter. We try to provide timely, obviously accurate information. It's more important than ever given the misinformation that we see out there. It also requires us to be advocates. That's the work that AJC does. And we have resources available for people that have factual information to help. We have resources to help people reach out to elected officials and business leaders and faith leaders and leaders of other groups in their community. I encourage people to take a look at that. Melanie, that's on the website, I believe. And then ultimately, I mean, sometimes just it's important to take a moment. Some of it by going through these materials, some of it just thinking about what we already know. Well, and big picture, we've talked about the horrific attack by this terrorist group that's resulted in the slaughter of 1,000 and 3,000 injuries, and that alone should be enough for people who care about morality. But if we're going further, just in terms of history, every time someone tries to rewrite history, the fact that when they talk about Israel occupying Gaza, Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005. And when it withdrew from Gaza in 2005, Hamas essentially took over, waged a coup, took over Gaza. Israel withdrew as a way to pave the way for peace between Israelis and Palestinians. And instead, Hamas has turned Gaza into this hotbed for hatred and terror. Hamas took over. They didn't change their tune. They took over with their charter already in print about their commitment to end Israel and to kill Jews. Their ideas, the people who are supporting Hamas need to remember that Hamas's ideas aren't beneficial to the Palestinian community. They don't advance peace between Israel and Palestinians. They're anathema to the very idea of peace. And the fact that in the midst of this ongoing and horrific attack, suggesting that somehow if Israel had negotiated with this terror group that at every turn has turned things into what will benefit their terrorism instead of what will benefit the Palestinians, it just ignores fact, it ignores history, and more than anything else, it starts with the hatred of Jews that the world has justified for too long. And I think it's really important for people to feel confident making that case. It will help us in the war of ideas, and it will help provide the support that's needed for Israel in world opinion right now, and as Israel goes through this work, and as we all continue to stand very firmly with Israel.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you, Ted. Thank you, Avital. Thank you, Eyal, for your time, for your insights, for your passion. We share it. We're here with you. And I really want to thank the so many hundreds and hundreds of people who have joined us today. There is a real appetite for information, and we are committed to continuing to provide that. So please stay tuned for more webinars of this kind. We know there will be much more to share in the days ahead. With that, Claire, I'll turn it over to you to give our audience some final thoughts.
Thank you all for today's really important conversation. And thank you again to our global audience for tuning in. To stay up to date on the evolving situation, please make sure to follow AJC on social media. We also urge you to visit our website at ajc.org/attackonisrael, where you can find informative resources, ways to take action, and information on how to donate to AJC's Israel Emergency Campaign. Today and every day, we stand in solidarity with Israel. Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you again, and goodbye.